We'll continue with the integration. We can do a couple more creative things with the background. So something I wanted to do was to ping out some of these little bokehs, as they all look a little bit flat and uniform right now. So what I mean by that is this. So I basically did this effect. So if I enable and disable, you can see just a couple of the bokehs are getting kind of pinged out. And what this does is it kind of allows us to bring some motion into the background as well. So basically the way I did this is I went back up to the top of the script and I keyed the highlights. So I get the highlights. And I took a noise pattern that looks like this. So basically I just take a noise and you kind of crunch it. You crunch it down like this, crunch it up like this, and then you can animate this using the Translate X in the transform. So you can kind of animate this quickly. So I did that. Actually, I think I animated it on Z, but basically the same idea. You just animate it so it looks like this. A little bit of animation. You blur it a little bit, and you mask that through the highlights. And then you can mask that and grade the image up. So when the image is not in focus, it looks a little strange. But when the image goes out of focus, what that little animation is going to do, running through the highlights, is to add some flicker to the bokehs, those little shapes. The bokeh is the little star shape that is formed when things are out of focus. So if we go back and we look at the shot, these little stars that are being formed everywhere. So I did that twice, basically. So I did a luminance key like that, and I did a luminance key like that. And I basically boosted the highlights on both of those. Now, there's something else we could do to make it more interesting, and I've kind of done it here, but I disabled it. We'll re-enable it now, but I want to do it from scratch just so you guys can see me walk through it. And I was just adding a bit of reflection to the water. I didn't bother with the area that we don't see. I just added some reflection over on this side, and I also added some water distortion. So this water distortion kind of will make it ripple and add some more motion to our scene. So the way I did it is pretty straightforward. Basically, you can take the image and mirror it. So I'll just copy it. And what you want to do is sort of line it up on itself. So if you merge it on itself and switch it to screen and look at it, you can kind of see it. And then you want to move it into place. The problem with mirroring an image is you don't... you see how, for example, this part of the pier would go here, but this part of the pier would go over here. So it never works. Like you can't just flip an image and get the perspective to be correct. You can try to play around with the skew sometimes, but it's limited into what you can do. So the way you could fix that perspective is to put a grid warp. So you put a grid warp on it, and it's a little bit hard to tell because everything's so bright. If I just darken this down a little bit, you can see these lines. And if you've never used a grid warp before, it's very simple. It's like Photoshop. You have these little lines, and you can just grab them. Or you can press Control-Alt, and you can add lines. So if I do Control-Alt and I click over, hover over this thing, I can add more lines. And so I can add lines around. So I'm going to add lines and try to line up this pier. So if I add another line here, I can sort of grab all these points and kind of stretch the image down. And this is going to help us sort of line up the reflection a little bit. And this doesn't have to be perfect or anything. This is just a quick and dirty reflection, and we're just kind of grabbing the pieces to line up the image there. So you see I've kind of just roughly put it into place like so, and then I can just keep adding points, the more kind of accurate you want it. And you just rotate these little Bezier curves. So every time you click one of these little points, you get this sort of rotation Bezier curve. So you can just rotate it around and sort of get everything into place. And so that's basically what I did. I just went around, started putting everything in place. So this part, you can move it here like this. And you can if you put edges right next to each other, it helps you do this. So you can put an edge right next to it. And then the next edge, you can easily really morph the points to where you need them to be. So this is like a total cheat, but it's totally fine because our shot is out of focus. So I'm just going to grab these and morph that pier all the way up. So it's kind of doing something like this. And Also, you want to make sure any obvious buildings like this are lined up. So you can see this yellow, or not yellow, the red, whatever's behind there is here. So it needs to be kind of straight in the reflection. So the obvious things that are visible, you might want to try to fix those and try to, make them visibly straight, like so. So you can see I'm lining that thing up so it kind of starts to get in the same reflection area as this thing. So something like that. And so this area is a little bit warped like crazy, so I'm just going to try to adjust it, and you can move these points as well. So you can move it like this. And maybe it's just that this is too far up, so we just kind of move it down and try to get something that looks like it might be right. So you can keep adding lines and keep morphing stuff to your desire. And so if we take a look here, so this area up here is all supposed to be towards the bottom. So I'm just going to grab all those points, and you can really just be really rough with it and just sort of put everything in place like this. So that's a very rough and quick version. You can see it's kind of messy, these points that I did just now, but you can do a better job and just try to get something that looks like it would be a reflection. And the reason this doesn't need to be super accurate is because we're going to blur it after. So as long as the really iconic things line up, it's okay. So you see this very obvious building that's white. You want to make sure those visible things are very clear. Whereas some of these orange areas, you're not going to be able to tell anyway. So something like that. So if I compare it to the one I did, it's sort of the same, but I don't know. I didn't spend a lot of time doing it because it's just a blurred reflection. So, and then you just put a blur, and if you put the blur node, and you press the little 2 button, you can get the width and the height separately, and then you can just blur it vertically. And then basically what I did was just mask that out by a rotoshape with a mask and screen this over. So you get this kind of fake reflection. So if I switch it to the one we just did, we can just see how it holds up. Yeah, it holds up pretty well. So you just get the sense of all those things. And then what I did was a little bit of an eye distort. So if you take a noise and you stretch it, so I'll make a noise and sort of make it really tiny, and then press the little 2 button and stretch it in the X. So you get like little longer strings. You can take this, and what I did was kind of blurred it a little bit, and then I just masked it out by a rotoshape. And then what you do is you put a copy node and put RGBA alpha to forward U and RGBA alpha to forward V. And again, if you checked out those videos I recommended you, U and V tutorials, it teaches what that is actually doing and why we're doing that. But if you don't want to watch the video and just want the quick version, RGBA.alpha to U, forward U, and RGBA alpha to forward V. That's what you set in the copy node. And then when you go to the eye distort, you select the forward channel. Basically what all that work does is allows us to basically just kind of use that noise pattern to distort. And that way we can kind of add some motion to the water. So now if we go back and take the noise pattern, we can obviously animate that and make it look like it's moving. So that's really cool. We got movement in the bokeh, we got movement in the water. And when we run that out of focus, we get something like this. So it's out of focus. We can see the little flickering in the highlights and a little bit of motion in the water. So that's just bringing a little bit of life into our composite to make it a little bit more convincing. So some other things we can do with this composite is if we're looking at this picture as a whole and we just step back, or we do our little blur technique, if we're just trying to see our picture from an artistic perspective. The most contrast in this picture still is the background, which is cool because he's swinging in this environment and everything. But what would be helpful is if we could bring some contrast into his face and a little bit more light from this building onto him. So we already did some of that on the left side of this guy. So if we sort of look at it. So that's our integration grading. You know, we already did a little bit of that shaping of the light on him. But it would be nice if we could see his expression, because this is the actor coming through our space. And maybe just add a little bit of light in general, you know, in this sort of area. So that's something we can do pretty easily. So I'm going to go here and put a grade node on the plate. And I'm just going to boost up the plate a little bit. And I'm going to put a rotoshape here and just sort of put that on the edge of his face. And we'll sort of just blur it off like that. So this is going to help us just sort of shape him a little bit more. And what we're going to do, there's a little technique we can do to make that light more convincing than just a grade. So if we just take a look at that and what that's doing, it sort of flattens his face a little bit. So what you really want to do is actually use the information that's there. So you want to put a keyer and use the same rotoshape. So we're going to leave that there, what we just did, but put another one and plug it into the keyer. Switch the keyer, and then we can go kind of crunch this, not crunch, but we can kind of pull this down, isolate the highlights, but not completely, just like mostly the highlights, a little bit of midtone. And then we can take the grade and we can boost the face the same way. So maybe we could even get a little bit more. I want a little bit more of that, those tones in there. So I'm just going to adjust that until I see some areas get a little brighter. So if I tweak that, something like that. And now I'll take the same roto and I'm going to put a mask to that kind of luminance key that we just did. So it's kind of doing this. So what are we doing? We're kind of boosting the highlights, but we're using a keyer to mask, and then we're using that to grade up, and then we're using another one to just grade overall a little bit. And if we take a look at what that does, whoops, let's make sure we're on the right thing. All right, so that's too much, but it starts to look a little bit more like light versus if I just disable this, you see how this just feels sort of flat? It doesn't feel like a real light, but if we start to pull out the highlights at the same time, it starts to just, something about it just looks more additive and a little bit more realistic. So we can just adjust that and tweak and play around with it. So I'm going to play around with the shape of that roto and just see what feels a little more natural. So something like that is more interesting. So you really see that that really pops our image a lot versus just having it flat. You can't even see his face. If you just zoom out, the last place you're looking is this person's face. It's all over here, which is kind of a problem because this is our actor. So we want to boost his face up to kind of bring him into the picture a little bit. So we can kind of do that. And then what we could do is put another rotoshape and just sort of chuck it in the bottom. We could even bring up the right side of the plate just a tiny bit. So let's just try it. Bring a feather in and sort of just, we could just keep it very subtle, but just helps to, maybe there's a light source down here and that's going to sort of give that effect. Now we got to be kind of careful because it's sort of flattening our image a tiny bit. So what you kind of could do is just take the second color correction and just bring the gamma down a little bit. So even though we're bringing light up on his face, we're actually adding a tiny bit of contrast. And we could do the same thing for the one above. We could just gamma down a tiny bit. We don't want to gamma too far. If you gamma up, if you gain up and gamma down, we are adding a little bit of saturation into the reds of his face by kind of doing a gamma. So we could reduce the saturation a little bit as well. So we could reduce the red in his face because we don't want his face to go red. So what you could do is take that and just go to the red suppress, sample that area, and just bring it down a tiny bit. And so if you're wondering, I just went through all that really fast, and you might be wondering, well, you feel like you're copying me or something like that. You wouldn't know to do that necessarily. What you always want to think is just studying the image for contrast, and you're going to get better with that with time and experience. But, like the gamma thing, if you gamma down, you're always going to add saturation. So usually if you're gammaing down, unless you want to add saturation, you need to, bring it back down a little bit. So that's just something that's always kind of a rule. So let's just do a gamma slam up, make sure we haven't broken anything. You know, it seems like his face is totally flat now if we look at the blacks. So, you know, the contrast doesn't feel right on his face. So we're going to still need to adjust that a little bit more. So if we just take one of the rotos here, I think we have a roto for his head. If we don't, we can just do it real quick and just adjust the midtones of his head. So we're just going to go there, blur it out, and just slightly bring down the gamma. We can use the numbers just to be more sort of controlled about it. Sort of feather that off. We don't want to do it on the place that's already kind of dark there. We just really want to do it sort of on his head and his face. So I'm just kind of isolating it. So you can see like it looks really flat, and now it's like not looking super flat. So that's good. And we can also do a little bit of that on the arm potentially as well. It might just be that the midtones are slightly too high. So we can do a gamma. Instead of a black point, you're doing a gamma, and we're just kind of bringing it down. We don't want things to look flat. And you'll train your eye with contrast with time. So it's nothing to worry about. You know, here is very contrasty still, and we still have a little bit of a lack of contrast here. So it might just be that we need to either lift this or contrast this even more. So we can always just sort of feather these contrast circles in, I guess. And the neck is a little bit too much. It might be just a little too dark as well. So that's the thing that's kind of standing out to me. Unless we kind of bring more contrast in, which might not be bad to do. The neck is the area of detail that had the area of the plate that had very little detail because of our glow. So that's something to keep in mind. So I'm just doing these circles around to play with the contrast. And you know, something like that is starting to feel a little better. So if you compare, you see it just starts to feel like we're pushing him into the picture. Here still feels a bit weird. We're going to need to darken that. But yeah, we'll just put this back to normal exposure. Again, that really helps a lot. So you can see it really starting to push the person into the picture. And then we'll just roto that mess through. So we kind of let's just gamma up, close all this stuff, and just go back to the start frame. Make sure we don't have any crazy stuff going on. And we can take this one and sort of just adjust it down a little bit as well. So whenever you see a little bit of lack of contrast, that's what's great about these rotos. You can just move them in and out as you need to. If it's a little bit too much, you slide it away. And people don't notice. It's a very subtle thing that's happening. So I think this is pretty good. Let me just go back to my one roto here that was kind of brightening up his face, and we'll just animate that one through as well. Just want to make sure everything is sort of sticking and not doing anything crazy there. So this is good. We still have the little holes in our alpha that I need to go fix, but it's sort of the last thing I'm going to do. I just want to get this sort of in a good place, composite-wise, before we start to QC, quality control, basically. Yeah, I'm just looking at this. So, cool. I think that's good for this video, and then we'll move on and we'll keep doing some more integration techniques.